Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to this webinar. As we know that research is a critical component for a scholarly career. In fact, the motto is publish or perish. Ironically, there is inadequate research funding in most academic institutions, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so today we are going to have an opportunity to listen to a new research funding grants availability from JPAL, especially for scholars interested on randomized evaluations in digital payment systems. It's not my business to preempt the presentations and the content of what you're about to listen, but rather it's my pleasure to invite you to listen to the presentations and request that you post your questions on the Zoom chat, or we will also have a brief session on Q&A at the end of our presentations. And so without any further ado, it's my singular pleasure to invite the Chairman, Department of Economics, University of Nairobi, Professor Anthony Wambungu, to make his remarks. Professor Wambungu, please, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joy. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon, this morning, I guess, some places. But it's really exciting for us because one of our core business is research, and the other is teaching. And since research is our core mandate, or is one of our core mandates, we are really excited that JPAL has honored us with this webinar. We do not take it for granted, and we look forward to strengthening this collaboration, and I hope that our scholars will take advantage of the opportunities that are available. And so I do not want to say much except to thank JPAL and the presenters, and enjoy the presentation, but more importantly, take action after the presentation. Let us all take action by doing those proposals. If you look at recent journals articles, you will find quite a number of surveys of RCTs. And you find that researchers at JPAL have a large chunk of that literature. So we would be happy to team up and to work together to publish, or because we don't want to perish. Joy. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wambungu, for your remarks. It's now my pleasure to invite Professor Tafnit Suri from MIT Sloan School of Management to give our remarks. Welcome, Professor Suri. Prof, you are muted. You are muted.
Thank you, Joy. Let me try that again. Thanks for the warm welcome, Prof, and Joy as well. It's really nice to be here. And I'm actually in Nairobi right now, which makes it even nicer. Someone today was complaining it was too hot, and I tried to explain to them there was no such thing as too hot in my books. This is what happens when you live in the US. Then you come home and you enjoy the warm weather. So welcome, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I think my job today is just to, I'm going to put on my JPAL hat. As Prof mentioned, JPAL has been running randomized controlled trials across many countries in the world, including the US, for a while now. And recently, over the last few years, we've been trying to build out programs to get funding to African scholars. This has been a very new activity of ours at JPAL. Just as an introduction, very quickly, as Joy mentioned, I'm a professor at the Sloan School of Management at MIT. I'm wearing my JPAL hats today, of which there are many, weirdly. The most important one being I'm the scientific director for the Africa office at JPAL, which is based in Cape Town. I also want to extend at this point gratitude to Joy and our Cape Town group, who you'll hear from shortly, for organizing this event. We're really excited to be here. So I run the Africa office along with Professor Isaac Beatty, who's at Virginia. I also wear a couple of other hats at JPAL. I chair the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative, which we'll talk about during this presentation. I also chair the Agricultural Initiative and the agricultural sector at JPAL. So those are my various hats, and I'm here representing JPAL today to talk a bit about kind of how we're trying to extend funding through some of our initiatives to African scholars. And most of that presentation will be covered by some of our awesome JPAL Africa staff. I think my job mainly is to talk about kind of how this came about and what the sort of benefit is for us. You know, over the last few years, before that, let me just talk a bit about JPAL's initiative structure, because you might not know about it. JPAL has underneath it things we call initiatives. These are pots of money that we fundraise for, that we can then give out to other scholars through an RFP process, a request for proposals process. For example, I've run the Ag Initiative for several years now. This has a pot of money that's available to study agricultural issues, broad ones. And we solicit proposals, and then we hand out money based on those proposals. So I've been running the Ag Initiative for a while. A few years ago, we raised a pot of money for a new initiative at JPAL called DigiFi, the Digital Identification and Finance Initiative. And as part of that pot of money, when we raised money to also fund African scholars. So these researchers based anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa working on issues that would fit the DigiFi initiative, and they can apply to us for funding in the same way as everybody else would, through an RFP process. And Amy and Nidhi, who are here today, will talk a bit about that and the details of it, so that they can kind of explain how the process works. But you know, a couple years ago, as we started raising this new pot of money, we decided it was time that we not just broadened, you know, access to RCT research and learning from it, but actually the funding, so that the people that are running RCTs are a little closer to where interventions are happening and closer to policymakers, so that they can reach out and have, you know, so the research that's done under that umbrella can have bigger impact, because these are people who are based on the ground, who are closer to the issues, who are closer to the policy venues to have impact on changing policy. And so over the last few years, I personally, as well as JPAL, have been very committed to this agenda of broadening funding for African scholars, with the idea that, you know, we'd like the best research done, and we'd like research to have the most impact on policy possible. So much as Joy said, publish or perish, I like to think about it as us learning the most we possibly can, Joy, and having the biggest impact on policy. And if we want to do that, I don't see any way we do that without reaching out to African scholars. In my books, there's just no way to do that. So we've been really lucky that we've managed to raise a pot of money for African scholars under DigiFi. The Jobs and Opportunities Initiative at JPAL has last week announced they have a pot of money for African scholars. They'll be holding their own webinar, and we can post a link to that in the chat. And we're hoping, you know, so that's 2 initiatives out of probably a dozen at JPAL. We're hoping that over the next year, there'll be other initiatives joining us in announcing African Scholars programs. So please keep an eye out for those. We hope there'll be more as we go. I'm actively involved in trying to create one now in another initiative. So hopefully in a month, I'll have some more news, fingers crossed. Anyways, we're really excited about this. It's important. It's important to me personally. As you probably realized, I'm in Nairobi because it's home. As Joy said, why are you staying on top of athletics? I was commiserating that we just lost the gold medal in the women's 5,000, but we got a silver, which is good. We're finally on the medals table. But so this is important to me personally because I'm Kenyan, but also it's important, I think, to the JPAL mission. And our mission is to create the best evidence and to have the biggest impact on policy that we can. And I think the African Scholars Programs are going to be really core to us achieving that mission. And I truly believe that. So I'm hoping this seminar will help people think about how they can apply for African Scholars funding. I'm around for the whole webinar, and we'll have a bunch of time at the end for question and answer. But we have a great program. We have great staff running and managing the program. So I'm going to hand off to them to start talking about the details of how these initiatives run and how to apply as an African scholar. Joy, let me hand back to you since you're MC for the day. Just want to say thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I hope this is useful, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions people have.
Thank you very much, Professor Suri, for such enlightening remarks and for your energy. Now, I'd like to invite Nithi Parake to make our first presentations on exactly what JPAL is and what this program is about. Nithi is the director of the Digify initiative at JPAL Africa. Nithi, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Joy. And thank you, Professor, as well, and Gurneet for all the kind words. And more than anyone else, thank you to everyone who is attending. It really is very exciting for us, and we're honored to be here. So like Joy said, my name is Nithi Parake, and I'm the director for Digify, which stands for Digital ID and Finance Initiative. And over the next 40 minutes or so, my colleague Amy and I will provide information on JPAL, which is our parent organization, and specifically at Digify, which is an initiative at JPAL. And then what I presume is most exciting is how you can get involved in the work that we are doing and how we can collaborate more. So diving straight into it and thinking about who JPAL really is. So JPAL is, in essence, a network of researchers, and we have over 200 affiliated researchers based at leading universities across the world. And on the screen, you can see some examples of universities where our staff are based. And we work across a broad range of sectors. And like Gurneet mentioned, we often focus research generation around specific sectors through initiatives, and you'll hear a little bit more about specific initiatives shortly. And for each sector, we have academic leads, and then we have staff who work in these areas to both generate research, but also make sure that the evidence that is generated informs policy. So now that we've talked a little bit about who we are, what is always very important to talk about is what do we aim to do as JPAL? And so our aim is to reduce poverty by ensuring policy is informed by scientific evidence. And this statement has a few components to unpack. So one is around poverty, one is around policy, and the third is scientific evidence. And I'll talk briefly about the poverty and scientific evidence part right now and come to the policy part, which is super important to us, a little bit later. So the focus on poverty is primarily because apart from the ethical and moral reasons, it is something that exists till date and has been quite persistent and complex. And while there has been a lot of research on the drivers of poverty, we have not seen eradication of poverty yet. And it has also been an issue that governments are very keen on trying to address. And so keeping this framework in mind, JPAL uses a specific tool to address poverty reduction, and that is scientific evidence. And when I say scientific evidence, it could mean a whole host of things for sure. And so what JPAL focuses on is randomized evaluations, which both Gurneet and Professor Anthony have already alluded to. And I'd like to say there are many methodologies that can be used to evaluate programs, but JPAL focuses on randomized evaluations or RCTs, and that is what we primarily fund. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why this is the case and what really is an RCT and why is it different from other methods. So before we go into that, I would like to talk a little bit about thinking about measuring impact. So when you're thinking about programs rolling out, whether they're government programs or interventions from the private sector, you're often thinking about what really is the impact of this program? What is the effect of this program? And I'm sure speaking to a bunch of researchers here, I don't need to go into very much detail with this. But to think about measuring impact, you have to think about comparing the outcomes of a group who has received the program, which we often call the treatment group, and a group that has not received a program or intervention, which is often called the counterfactual or comparison group. Now, in an ideal fantasy world, you could have the same group of people who get and don't get a program. And so you know that the reason that any effects you see are solely due to the fact that this group got the program. So in an ideal world, if you could go back in time and undo things and then try and see what the effect would be and what it wouldn't be, then you would be able to have a perfect counterfactual or comparison group. But of course, we don't live in this sort of world. So researchers try and build a useful counterfactual, one that can be suitably compared to a group where the intervention or treatment is provided. And so, again, to go a little bit into why a comparison group is so important, I'll provide an example. So in this example, the intervention is rolled out where the orange vertical line is, and you can monitor the effects of this group over time. So say at time t, where the orange line is, that's when the intervention is rolled out. And so you measure your outcome of interest over time. And so it goes from the purple dot to the red dot. And so now if you just look at this graph, one could say, well, it seems like the intervention has not been super successful. It has led to a decrease in the outcome of interest that we were interested in. But here, we're not really looking at a fair counterfactual or comparison group. So if we were actually looking at a group of people who were at the same period of time and had the same characteristics and did not receive this intervention, we maybe would find that they would be worse off than those that did receive the intervention. And so we would calculate impact by comparing the red and the blue dots and not the red and the purple dot. And an example of this is, say, the intervention is a cash grant, and that happens to coincide with COVID. And like all of you know, many governments have expanded their cash transfer programs during COVID. And so that could be the intervention. And now outcomes for people in general might fall because of COVID. Say your incomes might fall because of COVID. But that doesn't mean the cash grant is leading to a fall in your income. It's that everybody's incomes are falling and the cash grant is actually helping you tide over these times to a certain extent because you're better off than those that didn't receive a cash grant. And this is the idea behind having a suitable counterfactual and why it's so important. And so now that we've established the need for a good comparison group or a good counterfactual, let's talk more specifically about randomized evaluations. So in a randomized evaluation, you construct a comparison group that closely resembles the group that received the intervention. How do you do this? You randomly assign people into two groups. So one is the treatment group and one is the comparison group. And now because you have randomly assigned people into these two groups, there should be no differences in these groups. And these should be no differences on observables and non-observables. And so observables could be differences such as income, age, sex, etc. But also unobservables could be personality traits or even traits that you don't have data on that might be difficult to capture. And because we don't live in a world where we have data on everything, a randomized evaluation can be an effective way to rule out those sort of biases. And so because the only systematic difference between the treatment group or the intervention group and the comparison group should be the presence of the program, because everything else is random, a randomized evaluation allows us to identify a causal pathway or allows a causal interpretation of the difference between the treatment and control group. And this is the crux of the work that we do. And there's obviously a lot more literature on this, and I'm sure many of you are aware of it as well. But I want to give you a flavor of the work that we do for those who might not be familiar. And then RCTs and randomized evaluations, like Professor said, has been gaining a lot of popularity over time. And one point to this is that in 2019, two of our founders, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, along with a longtime JPAL research affiliate, Michael Kremer, won the Nobel Prize. And one of the big reasons for this was that their use of RCTs in development economics and to influence policy. And then similarly, the use of RCTs has been increasing exponentially. And so you can see here that JPAL currently has funded over 1,000 randomized evaluations across the globe in 88 countries, and many of which are in Kenya as well, which is great news. And it's a great place for researchers to work. And also, as we have more randomized evaluations, it helps us learn better from similar studies across different contexts, so we can build our knowledge base more effectively. So now I've spoken about our randomized evaluation and more of our research work. And like Tadneet mentioned, a big focus of our work is also translating our research into action. We don't want our research to be in isolation of impact or policy. And so we work on other aspects of this as well. And so I like to think of it as we have three buckets of work. One is evaluations, which I've spoken about extensively. One is policy outreach, and one is capacity building. And so evaluations are the actual research, but also the research questions should be policy relevant. And in often cases, it should be generated in collaboration with policymakers or private sector implementers. So you're definitely addressing a policy gap or a private sector need. And this is the core of what we do, but we want to be sure that these evaluations actually inform policy. So before a research project is set up, and once we have the results, we work with policymakers to both identify research questions that are relevant to policy, as well as to inform their policy with existing and new results, to make sure that we can contribute to the decisions that are being made. And then another big focus area for us is around capacity building. And this takes a couple of forms. So one capacity building measure is around thinking about how we can support policymakers to better use evidence and train them on conducting their own research as well as using existing research. And another big bucket is around ensuring our work is driven by African scholars and making funding available for that, which Amy will talk about more. And because we've been speaking about impact, as evaluations see the light of day and you work in collaboration with governments, it has the added advantage that your results are often scaled up. And over time, JPAL is reaching more and more people through the scale up of randomized evaluation programs that they have conducted. And as of 2019, through the various scale-ups of programs that have been evaluated by JPAL affiliates, we have reached 400 million people. So that's a little or a lot about JPAL in general. And I now want to move to Digify. So that's Digital ID and Finance Initiative. And this is the initiative that I direct at JPAL Africa. And so within the broad framework of JPAL, you have Digify. And we have a similar aim as JPAL, which is to reduce poverty, but with a more focused mandate on digital ID and digital payment systems. Now, why are we interested in digital ID or payment systems? The reason for this is that there are very many governments and private sector implementers that are rolling out digitization of financial services or identification. I mean, I don't need to for the Kenyans out there, you're at the forefront of this work. So whether it's Hudumba number or if it's M-Pesa or Mshwari or other mobile money products, so much is happening in Kenya, which is very exciting. And we are trying to see what could be the potential costs and benefits of these reforms and these innovations. And why we're really interested in this is, one, we think they have huge implication in terms of impact. And there's actually very little evidence, especially on digital identification systems, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So we focused on sub-Saharan Africa and thinking about digital ID and digital payment systems. And when I say we, I just wanted to give you a sense of who we are. So this is the team. You've already met Tavneet. You'll see Amy a little bit later. And then we are also co-chaired by Jenny Aker, who sits at Tufts University. And we have a host of staff who are both thinking about what policy questions we should address, trying to support existing research projects, and also making sure our processes are smooth. And a majority of us are based in Cape Town, where JPAL Africa is headed, but we're also based in several other cities and countries. Cool. Now I want to talk a little bit more about our scope and what exactly we look at. So I've already mentioned that we focus on digital ID and digital payment systems, but I want to go a little bit deeper into that. And so I would really recommend anyone who's interested in our work to look at our framing paper, which Tavneet Suri and a PhD student at Harvard, Shweta Bhogle, put together. And it details the various aspects of our work and even some research questions that are unanswered. But I'll just give you a brief idea of how we have organized our framing paper and the scope of our questions. So we've divided our work into 4 buckets. There's the supply side channels, demand side channels, externalities, and the supply and demand side channels together. So for example, on the supply side channel, we usually think about, from a government's perspective, what are the key questions that they are faced when they're rolling out digital ID or digital payment systems. And so, for example, a government is rolling out a digital ID system, and they could be thinking about using it to monitor civil servants. So what is the effect of monitoring civil servants? You also can link various data sources to a single digital ID. How does that affect leakages, or how does that provide help with targeting because you have a more holistic picture of welfare services? So those are some examples of supply side channels. Then when you think about demand side channels, I like to think about it from more of a citizen's perspective. And so you're thinking about what factors lead to a citizen accessing a digital ID or payment system, right? So what makes someone want to take up a digital ID more? How does it affect, how does competition in the digital payment system affect transaction costs? What is the customer experience with these various new innovative products that are coming out? And so a whole host of questions are under the demand side channels. And then when you think about the intersection of the supply and demand channels, I often think about the fiscal revenue space, because when you're thinking about taxation, it's both very supply and demand driven. And so with digital IDs and digital payment systems, how are you changing the tax system? How are both the supply and demand side reacting to the changes that you're imposing? And what are the positive and negative effects of that? And then finally, on externalities, when you provide a digital ID or a digital payment system, they could have a whole host of spillover effects. And this could be from a digital ID increasing engagement in the labor market or the banking sector, to digital cash grants changing the local economy in some way. And these are, again, very interesting questions that we can think more about. And again, I would really encourage anyone who's interested in our scope to look at our framing paper to learn more. Next, I want to talk a little bit about our funding opportunities, and Amy will go into more detail about specific opportunities for African scholars. I just want to talk about the different kinds of projects that we fund. And we've already spoken about the full randomized evaluation, which is our main focus area. And we fund randomized evaluations up to 400,000 per project. And this is, like I said, both with the focus of generating compelling evidence for specific governments, as well as generating high quality academic research that can be used across contexts. And then we also fund pilot and monitoring systems, and we've not really talked about these yet. So a pilot, we can fund up to the value of $75,000. And a pilot usually helps identify the challenges and achievements of a digital system when it's just being rolled out. So you need to know what the first stage is or what the take-up of an ID is before you look at a randomized evaluation of the effects of linking a digital ID to welfare services. And so a pilot looks at the logistics of the rollout of a program, what the initial take-up is like to help you understand whether you can conduct a full impact evaluation. And pilots don't need to be randomized evaluations. They can use other forms of data collection and evaluation to identify first stage impacts. And then a slightly new thing that we also fund is around monitoring systems, which I think can be really interesting. And so monitoring systems help governments make decisions in shorter timeframes than to what RCTs or randomized evaluations usually take. And so with the digitization of IDs and payment systems, there's a huge influx of data. And the idea is if we can support policymakers in visualizing and building sound databases, that's a huge public good, both for policy impact purposes, but also for research purposes where often quality data is a constraint. And so it's also a really good mechanism to build a relationship with a partner government or a partner private sector. And then finally, we fund proposal development grants, which are up to the value of $10,000. And this is usually exploratory work related to a preliminary research idea. So you need an identified research question, but you're maybe looking to establish a partnership with the government or private sector, and you can use this $10,000 to establish that a little bit more, and maybe also understand the context a little bit more if you have a research question. And I won't go into the eligibility criteria yet, because I think Amy will talk to that in more detail. And finally, from my end, I want to give you a flavor of the various projects that we have currently funded. And so we currently have 21 projects, including proposal development grants, pilots, and monitoring systems. And these are across 12 countries. We do have a few projects in Kenya, which we're very excited about. And we have 7 projects with African scholars, which we are very happy about, but we want to increase this number as well, because like Tavneet said, we believe if you need to have policy impact, the work has to be driven by African scholars who understand the local context and understand the policy implications. So with that, thank you so much for hearing me out. And I'm going to hand over to Amy to talk us through the next section. Joy, should I hand over back to you first?
No, it's okay. Amy, please take it on.
Great. Thanks so much, Joy. And thank you, Nidhi, for explaining everything. So I'm going to be taking us through just some of the research opportunities specifically focused for African scholars. Great. So we have quite specific kind of eligibility definitions when it comes to African scholars. And I even have seen that Pamela has already preempted this question in the chat. But just to give you a sense of what we mean by African scholars, I've kind of outlined exactly what our definitions are. So we have 2 different buckets of African scholar definitions. The first are resident African scholars. So these are folks who have completed their PhD in economics or a related field and who are based at an academic institution in Africa. So this means a university Unfortunately, we aren't able to fund think tanks, but these are specifically for folks at universities. And then the second definition is our non-resident African scholars. So folks who have completed high school in Africa, have their PhD in economics or a related field, and who are also based at an academic institution, so university, but outside of Africa. So we're capturing both folks that are on the continent, as well as folks who are not currently based on the continent. Great. So I wanted to just give you a bit of a sense of what the different components of the support that we provide to African scholars. So for Digify, we have the 4 different funding categories that are, or the 3 different funding categories that are available to all. So we have our proposal development grants, the pilot grants, as well as the full RCT money. For African scholars, it's important to note that to be eligible to apply for RCT money, you have to have completed a successful pilot with JPAL. Hopefully after completing your pilot grant with us, you would then be able to kind of move on to that next stage of running a full project. We provide mentorship support, which is really important and really a nice addition to the project. So we match our African scholars with either a JPAL affiliate or an invited researcher who can play sort of a mentoring sort of role, give advice, have some sort of check-ins, be able to connect you with resources. And yeah, this is somebody, a JPAL affiliate or an invited researcher who is really experienced when it comes to running these RCTs. And then we have sort of additional training and staff support. So our staff, so myself and Nidhi and our postdocs, are all available to chat with you if you are interested in submitting a proposal and want to talk through some of your research ideas, or kind of can help you think a little bit more critically about what you're planning, and help you kind of define that research question if you would like. We have the MicroMaster scholarships. So JPAL has a number of different online course content, one of which is a course on running randomized evaluations. So we have some scholarships available to African scholars who are interested in taking that course. And then we also have some additional training opportunities as well as convenings, trying to kind of generate new ideas, as well as allowing for kind of cross-project learning, as well as trying to take projects from kind of the stage that they're at. So from a proposal development grant to a pilot, or from a pilot to an RCT. Can you go to the next slide, Nidhi, please? Great. So this is just the process for how the application, kind of the different steps within the application process, and how we review the proposal at its various stages. So the first step is that if you are interested in applying, you would submit a pre-proposal, which is an online form that has just a few questions to really understand what you're generally looking to do, and for us to assess if the project is within the scope of Digify. So this is sort of an initial stage where we can get a fairly good sense of the project and what you're planning, but without you having gone into all the details in really putting together the full proposal. So this stage is really useful for us because it makes sure that we're not wasting your time if the project is outside the scope of what we could fund. And so that pre-proposal is reviewed by the Digify co-chairs, so Tavneet and Jenny, and we often do a call within the Digify team. So we have a call with the staff, and we confirm that eligibility is all correct as well. If you are successful at that stage, then we would ask you to submit a full proposal, which is a lot more detailed and requires one to kind of submit a budget. I'll go into some of the details of exactly what you need to submit, but there are a number of different components that are required in that sort of full proposal submission. And the full proposal is reviewed by the Digify staff members. We get academic peer reviewers, so JPAL affiliates who are within kind of the field of Digify's research agenda, but who aren't on our board. So those are the academic peer reviews, and then we have the board review. So our Digify board members includes Tavneet, Jenny, a number of other academics and policymakers, and they all do a review of the proposal and make a final decision on the project if it's successful for funding or not. If one is successful at that stage, then you would be matched with a mentor, and we have a bit of a process with generating a mentor-mentee agreement before finalizing the project and accepting it as part of our portfolio. So that gives you a bit of a sense on the different components and kind of the step-by-step process. At the moment, we're running our applications on a rolling basis. So that means that there aren't any specific deadlines, but we kind of, the first step 1 and step 2 kind of usually happen within a couple of weeks of getting back to you, and then the same with the full proposal submission. So we kind of are doing this more on a rolling basis so that when projects are ready, they can come to us, and it's not on as sort of a deadline. Great. All right, so I thought it would be quite nice to think a little bit and reflect back from myself and Nidhi's experience of reviewing these proposals and thinking about some sort of tips and tricks around what goes into a proposal that has been successful. And just to say that as staff, we don't make the decisions on the proposals, so it's always up to the board members. But we have picked up some ideas on what sort of core elements certain proposals have in common if they're successful. So I thought I would just take you through some of these core ideas. So I'll be going through each of these in more detail, but kind of as a high-level guide, we're looking for proposals that have a really strong research question, ones that have some sort of pathway to an RCT or randomized evaluation. We want to make sure that the proposals follow all the application guidelines, so have all the right pieces in it, and a proposal that's really quite simple, succinct, and nicely written is always pretty helpful as part of that review as well. So the first item is the strong research idea. And what we mean by this is that it's a sort of a research question that is academically interesting. So there needs to be some sort of contribution to the literature. It needs to be policy relevant. So it's useful to have include your partners as part of that application. We want to see that there's some buy-in potentially from the partner. The project needs to be within the Digify research agenda. So as Nidhi explained earlier, you can have a look at the framing paper to see how your research questions might fit into what our research agenda is. And then there needs to be an RCT-able idea. So this kind of blends a little bit to the next sort of point, but there needs to be a sort of a cause and effect question that you're examining. It's quite a specific kind of question, but it needs to be a question that could fit within kind of the RCT method. which kind of leads me to the second point, which is about a pathway to a randomized evaluation. And here we're trying to see that you either have an intervention planned that you want to evaluate, or there's some sort of possible intervention or program that you plan to evaluate in the future. And I think this kind of links to that RCT-able research question. We're trying to look for projects where there could be an RCT in the future, and kind of seeing that as part of the proposal is quite useful as part of our review process. Specifically for pilots, we're looking for fairly strong buy-in already shown by the partner. So having that really clearly articulated as part of your proposal is important, as well as kind of showing us why you think the pilot would be useful and how this could lead you to running a bigger RCT in the future. And then making sure that you follow the application guidelines. So there's a lot of detail on our website if you're interested in going into the details here, but we have quite clear specifications of the different components that need to be included as part of these proposals. So this would only be for that full proposal stage. So after you are successful at the pre-proposal, we would ask you to submit all these documents depending on what kind of grant you're applying for. They're mostly having that narrative, having a budget is really important. For pilots, having a letter of support from your partner. And then we have some additional requirements for African scholars specifically. So we have some cover sheets and whatnot that we need to just collect some additional information about you to ensure that you're eligible as well. And then a fairly obvious one, but really important, and I really wanted to highlight, is having a really succinct and clearly written proposal is very helpful. So being able to make sure that your idea is well communicated, I think is important. So just a couple of tips around proposal writing. So could be useful to build kind of a strong structure before you start writing. So build it out from a structure. Being clear in your title of your proposal would be useful. Citing the relevant literature so that we know that you have engaged with the existing literature and are able to make a contribution to that literature. Using clear, concise language. Making sure you review your proposal before sending it through. And something that can be quite helpful is also to ask others to review your proposal so that if anything is unclear, they can kind of flag it for you and you can adjust that before submission. And then we have a whole lot of different, some different resources when it comes to writing that we've put together. I'll share the slides after this session, so you'll have these different links, but there are a number of different resources that you can kind of leverage, along with having a look at the different randomized evaluations on the JPAL website, if you want to be inspired about the different RCTs that have already been run. Great. All right, and then just if you are interested in submitting a proposal to Digify, I thought it would be useful just to go through some of the next steps. So the first one, great. So these are the next steps that you might be interested in doing. So the first is that we have an African Scholars Registry, which is a way that we have kind of clustered together the database of African scholars who are interested in our research agenda and being contacted in the future. So signing up to that would be potentially could be helpful for you so that you're in the loop if we have new funding windows, or just to kind of flag your interest to us. So there's that. You can have a look at our website to find out more details around the framing paper and all the different kind of components of the actual application. You can contact us, the Digify team, if you would like to have a conversation about one of your research ideas and you want to discuss this more. And if you're feeling ready, you can submit a pre-proposal and yeah, see how it goes. So those are kind of the next steps that you might be interested in looking at. And then I wanted to just flag 2 other research initiatives that are also based at JPAL. And Tavneet did flag this at the start of the session, but just 2 other research initiatives that are also funding African scholars as part of their research agenda. So the first is the Jobs and Opportunities Initiative, which is a research initiative that really is focused on sort of the labor market and thinking about employment outcomes. And so they're looking at trying to understand how RCTs would help us understand kind of the solutions to employment challenges. So they have 3 main kind of areas of research interest. The first is around training and matching. So they're in that training and matching sort of bucket, they're trying to think around questions about reducing search barriers for job seekers or thinking about hiring discrimination. So things within the matching side of things of the labor market. Then they have interest in job creation. So this is around thinking about public works programs or identifying and supporting high growth entrepreneurial activities. So generating new jobs. And then the third bucket is around the future of work and the future of jobs. So this is kind of thinking about preparing people for a changing labor market, thinking about protections for the gig economy workers and informal workers, and where the kind of the employment, where the labor market might end or kind of lead to. So this is kind of the research agenda that JOIS, the Jobs and Opportunities Initiative, is looking at. It's very exciting that they've just as of last week announced that they will be running a African Scholars Program, which is structured in the same way as the Digify one. So with our proposal development grants, pilots, and full randomized evaluations. Folks would also be matched with a mentor, as with Digify. I think the main difference, besides the obvious research agenda difference, is they are only going to be funding resident African scholars in sub-Saharan Africa specifically. So if you are somebody who's completed your PhD in economics or a related field and who are based at a university in sub-Saharan Africa, then you would be eligible to apply for JOI funding. And this is just the timeline of how things are rolling out for JOI's funding window. So they are hosting a funding window rather than a rolling RFP call. So for JOI, the RFP is opening early this month, with letters of interest due on the 7th of September and full proposals due on the 12th of October if one is successful at that letter of interest stage. And you can have a look at their website to, if you want to understand or have more information about JOI and the Jobs and Opportunity Initiative. And then the second initiative that I wanted to flag is the Gender and Economic Agency Initiative, or GEA, which is another research initiative based at JPAL. And they focus mainly on gender and the labor market. And they also have 3 different main areas of focus. So workplace arrangement and labor policies, enhancing women's labor market potential, and addressing gender norms and attitudes. And within those two sort of broad research agendas, they have priority areas for research within addressing gender norms and attitudes. So thinking about women's work and roles, occupational sex segregation, unpaid care work, and public safety. And then within enhanced women's labor potential and work readiness, they're thinking about technical skills development, soft skills training, promotion and management training, as well as thinking about social networks and how the women's labor market might change things there. And so important with GEA is they have a slightly different sort of model when it comes to funding African scholars. So with GEA, African scholars have to be matched with a JPAL affiliate in order to be eligible to apply. So I'd really recommend, if you are interested in GEA funding, to reach out to the GEA team prior to submitting anything. But to give you a sense on the geographic focus, they have specific target countries that they would like to fund more research. So Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, with some limited funding in other areas. They have the same funding categories, but for RCTs only up to $300,000 US. And it's looking like they're also going to be running an RFP window rather than a rolling RFP. And so that RFP will open in November, closing late January, with decisions in mid-March. Yeah, so that was quite a whirlwind of lots of information, but that gives you a bit of a sense of Digify's African Scholars model and the different components that we offer within Digify, and then these two other research initiatives that are also focused through or run through JPAL, who also have African Scholars sort of components as well. So yeah, we've got the email addresses on the slide at the moment. So I would recommend, if you are interested in applying, to reach out to folks at these initiatives to either get more information or to make sure you're eligible. But yeah, Joy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aimee and Neeti, for such detailed presentations. I think you've had a lot of information. And thank you for posting questions on the chat. I think most of them on the chat have been answered. But now I'm going to open up the floor in case you want to ask your question. Now the time is yours. Please go ahead and shoot. You may raise a hand, or you may just go ahead and ask your question. Anyone with a question? Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, they might not be able to unmute themselves, so they might just, I think a couple of people raise their hand.
I can, Joy, if you're a host, you can allow to talk. So you will have to let them talk. So maybe pick the hands that are up and just click on allow to talk.
Neeti, please go ahead and do that. I think you're the host.
I'll do that. Laura, the floor is yours.
Laura, I think you're muted. You'd have to unmute yourself.
All right, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I have a couple of questions. Perhaps I had contacted Neeti previously on several emails. I and other researchers from UC Berkeley had an idea on gamified savings and how we could use betting to encourage savings, but we were not too sure that that might tie in with what the agenda Digify has. So that is still something that we are not too sure about, whether it's worth it for us to make the application or to look for the grant that will help us to develop the proposal. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Laura. You know what I would suggest? We have a short form that's like a letter of interest for Digify. I would recommend you fill that. It's 3 questions. It should take you 10 minutes to fill, hopefully 15, and submit that. And then we can review that carefully and get back to you. We usually respond to those between 24, 48 hours, something like that, aside from weekends as a warning.
right.
But I would recommend there's a letter of interest. We have rolling deadline. We don't have a deadline at Digify anymore. It's rolling. So you can submit a short letter of interest. We'll look at that and we'll get back to you.
Okay. Yeah, and so apart from that, so I noticed that there are other calls, like for the GIA, where Joy is. I happen also to be working with another team of researchers on that. And I was wondering whether these projects are connected in any way, or it's possible to apply for all of them if capacity allows. Yeah.
Joy, do you want to take that? I mean, across initiatives, you can apply to multiple initiatives, Laura. It just has to fit the topics of the initiative. So like Digify had a white paper that Nidhi put the link in the chat. All of us tend to have a bit of a white paper or a document that highlights the topics of interest. And so as long as the topics fit, I think you can apply to multiple initiatives. On
right.
GIA, you would need a co-PI who would be a JPAL affiliate. But for the other 2, you don't. For Joy, it depends on, you have to be a resident African scholar, but if you're a resident African scholar, you can apply to Joy or Digify.
Okay.
Yeah, for GIA also, I think they have some kind of an African scholars program, of they try to do that. Maybe actually, I see Akshara Gopalan is here. Maybe she could take that and just give us more details. Niti, if you can unmute Akshara to comment on the GIA process and the matching process.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi everyone,
Yes.
good to be here. So just on GIA, so if you can reach out to either Joy or I and express interest and let us know what you're interested in, we can try to match you with co-PIs who are or projects that are interested in engaging with African researchers. So we do that on the back end. So we can handle the matching. So you can just write to us if you're interested in applying, and we can on the back end try to see if we can match you with a co-PI. But otherwise, I think what's been said before is right. You'd need to be a co-PI with a JPAL affiliate or invited researcher to apply. Yeah. Thanks, Joy. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Shara, for that clarification. Do we have another hand? You can unmute the next.
Yeah, Nidhi, why don't you go ahead? We have a bunch of hands.
So I have allowed Casa, Getachew Casa, to talk. Are you there?
Yes, but yeah, in fact, I'm a public health professional, so I was planning to sort of do a research on like health economics, the impact of health insurance, and the like, if that's possible.
The health in where? Sorry, Getachew?
The health insurance, the impact of health insurance. I want to link the public health with the economics concepts using an impact evaluation design.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, awesome. We don't actually have a health initiative at the moment. So again, it's worth looking at the initiative's white papers and seeing if there's a topic under there that fits what you want to do. So Digify is interested in digital identification and finance. We have funded a health insurance pilot in Ghana where they're connecting the health insurance to digital IDs or digital systems. So that would fit, but general health insurance would not fit. So I think it's really important for all these initiatives to check out the white papers or the scoping papers that tell you kind of what things fit and what don't. And then if you have questions, please reach out to the team and they can answer them.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Akshara, I see your hand is up. I don't know if you have a question or you want to add to anything, or it's from before.
It's from before. Thanks. I'm sorry
Yeah.
about that.
No problem. Arinze, over to you. I've given you rights.
Okay, thank you very much. So I wanted to ask a question regarding the white paper, right? So I've looked at the white paper a couple of times, and I see that everything seems to be focused on government, right? So something to do with government, and it's also focused on biometrics. So the question now is, if you do a research that is not focused on biometrics and not on the government, but on fintech, right, that also do payment systems, is that eligible, right?
Yeah, Arinze, there's a small section in the white paper on private sector.
Yeah, I saw
stuff.
that. Yeah.
But yes, that's why it's digital ID and finance. There is a finance piece. It has to be digital. So it has to be a digital payment system related. But yes, that is a fit for us on Digify in general. Again, I would encourage you to fill in the LOI, the letter of interest, because then we'll be able to figure out if there's enough there for a fit, right? Because we'll have a bit more details than a 30-second conversation on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
So I strongly encourage you to fill that in. If you have questions about how to fill that in, please reach out to our staff.
All right, so just the last thing, right? So
sure.
I'm aware of certain biometric identification that's happened in Africa, for instance, in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And also the digital payments, right, within the government. Now, the problem here is it has already been rolled out, okay? So when I look at some of the questions on the framing paper, the question is practically asking you to do it before the rollout, right? So that you can be able to measure the impact. But now that it's rolled out, so how do you now start going back to the impact? It's like acting after the fact, right? So
yeah, that's a great question, Arinze. So the way I think about it is, so first of all, the rollout is not perfect, I promise you. There's going to be some people who are excluded.
Okay.
So one way is to think about who got excluded from the rollout, who didn't sign up during the original rollout. Because even if you roll out, not everybody signed up. Like Kenya has a biometric ID, I have not signed up. I'm not the target audience, admittedly, for the grant, but I haven't signed up. So you could imagine there's some, especially marginalized populations who never got told about it properly, who never signed up. That will be an opportunity. And for us on Digify, those sorts of populations are super of interest, right? Because they're the people who get left out if we went digital, right?
Okay.
So that's one way to think about it. Who didn't sign up and who are those folks and how many? And I guarantee you there are many.
Yeah.
The second way is to say, well, once everybody has an ID, you still have to link it to things, right? Just doing the biometric ID is not enough. It doesn't do anything unless it's linked to maybe a fertilizer subsidy, right? Or a health insurance subsidy or something. And maybe that could be the opportunity for the RCT, right? Where you say, oh, you know what? The Ministry of Ag wants to link it to the fertilizer subsidy they're giving out so that there's less leakage in the fertilizer subsidy, right? And so you could work with the Ministry of Ag and say, let's test that with an RCT, for example, right?
All right.
So the two ways to go about, even if there's been a rollout. One is finding the people left out and, seeing whether they're a certain group or certain marginalized community or group. And the second is, can we randomize how we link it to things as we go and understand the impacts of that? Because the impact of the ID is only as strong as what it would be linked to, right? If you don't actually link it to anything, it doesn't do anything.
Anything. All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the questions, Arinze. And I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please correct me if not.
Yes, it is Arinze. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so next up we have Simeon. And again, I'm going to echo what Tavneet said and saying, I'm very sorry in advance if I'm correctly pronouncing.
Good evening. Yeah, my name is Simeon from Eldoret. So I have interest to do some research with the DigiFinance team. So my question is, I've completed my PhD and I've submitted for examination. So am I eligible to submit a proposal?
Simeon, I think sorry, go on.
Okay, and then number 2, my PhD supervisor is a statistician. So I don't know, is it possible we can work with him? And he's well versed in econometrics.
Great,
Thank you so
Simeon,
much.
thanks for the 2 questions. The first one, no, until you have it approved or you've passed the examination. But first, congratulations on submitting your thesis. Number 1, big step. And I wish you luck with the exam, but you would need to have completed the exam. The second, yeah, absolutely. If your PhD supervisor wants to apply and fits a resident or non-resident African scholar, absolutely you can apply with him, for sure. Again, I would encourage you to get together with him and fill in the LOI.
Lastly,
Yep.
yeah, it's about the MicroMaster scholarship. So can I apply the MicroMaster scholarship?
Take that one.
Hello?
Yes. So you said you have submitted your PhD. Sorry. You're currently a PhD student, if I understood correctly, and you want to apply for the MicroMaster scholarship. So there are 2 things. One is that you can take the MicroMasters to audit as well. So you don't necessarily need the scholarship to take the course. As a PhD student, you are not, we usually don't provide scholarships to PhD students, but do email us and tell us, like, you seem very close also to the end of your PhD. So just email us and we can have a conversation in more detail about it. But I definitely encourage you to email us about this in more detail. That helps.
Is still someone?
Yes, there is Jacob. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. Just 2 questions. One related to what has just been asked. I went to the website and I tried to register for the DEDP course. And I saw the option of auditing, but I wanted to really understand what would be the criteria for enrollment into for the scholarship. So, and the second one is, there was an earlier question where a friend was asking about if there's a program that is already running. Let's assume that they actually randomized. Would you still take it, given that you didn't have much control of the randomization? You never know, what happened in the randomization. Would one not be more confident if you actually participate in the randomization, but you can just take something external and use it in your research? Thank you very much.
Nidhi, do you want to talk about the scholarships for DEDP?
Yeah, actually, Amy, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the full question, but the way that our scholarships work are that we run them for every term. So the next term that is starting for the MicroMasters is in, I think it's in September, October. And we have a short form that one would submit prior to starting the semester. You would then start the term, and we use the first 2 weeks of the course to select the folks who actually get the scholarship. So you would start the course, you would audit the course for the first 2 weeks and submit your application for a scholarship. We would then tell you if you had received the scholarship or not prior to the financial aid deadline, so that if you are successful, you can put in the course coupon, and if you aren't successful, you can still apply for the financial aid and take the course exam. But just to reiterate, if you are interested in just the course content and you don't need the certificate at the end, then you can just watch all the videos, you can take all the sort of little tests and finger tests and whatnot, that's all free. So you can still absorb as much of the information as you want without having to pay. But then these scholarships just allow you to kind of certify the credit at the end and take that final exam. But if you are interested, as we've said multiple times, please get in touch. I can send you more details as well if you need.
Great, thanks, Amy. Jacob, on your second question, you're right. Ideally, the randomization has been at least conducted in or observed by the researcher. That said, there's ways to show that the randomization was done correctly if there's data before the randomization or something like that. So I wouldn't rule it out completely if the randomization is already done. I think there's just a bar to cover, a bar to jump to show that the randomization was done cleanly. So either, you have access to the code with which they randomized, or you can look at pre-data and show that it's balanced. So I wouldn't rule it out completely, Jacob, but ideally, yes, you have some at least observability of the randomization before it happens.
Great. Dr. Blaise, I see you are here and have a question. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please go on. We can hear you.
Okay. As you know, I'm from Burundi, and here we have some limitation of documentations, research documentations. And the other problem is that we are from French countries, and we have limitation of using English. I want to ask if mentors can't be French speaker, and if there is possibilities of getting access of to documentation when someone is preparing the pre-proposal. Thanks.
Sorry, great question, Dr. Blaise. Thank you for that. Nidhi, we should look into providing our documentation in French if we can. That's a great idea. Dr. Blaise will try and do that ASAP and post those. It might take us a few days, but we'll do that. If you're successful at a grant, we can absolutely get you a mentor who speaks French. That will not be a problem. There's plenty of French speakers in our network. And so I think that should not be a problem. Unfortunately, the proposal will have to come in English. And that's going to be unavoidable because the evaluation committee will not all speak French, I'm afraid. So if possible, but what you could do, yeah, the reports will have to be in English as well, because again, the people reading will have to be in English. Let me take this offline, Dr. Blaise. Well, we'll try and see if we can add paying for translators in the pilots in the proposal development. Let me take that back to our group and think about it. But we can provide the proposal documentation in French. That will be easy. We can provide mentors that speak French, but the proposal, unfortunately, will have to be in English.
And then Joy and Akshara, I see there are a couple of questions which are GIA specific. So one is, who are the key target applicants for GIA? And a second is around the co-authorship arrangement for the African Scholars model that GIA adopts. So I don't know if you or Akshara would like to answer them, Joy.
Akshara will take that. Akshara, please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. We also have a white paper or a framing paper that, that sort of can help you figure out what are the key themes, which I think answers the target audience question. And I'm still trying to find the second question on co-authorships, which you mentioned, but give me a second. I'll just find that, read it, and answer it.
As Akshara does that before she takes the floor again, is there another question? Or should we give her a few minutes to take the floor? If there's no,
There is one.
we can have Irene, then we go back to Akshara. Nidhi, please enable Irene. Irene's hand was up. Irene, did you put your hand down? Do you have a hand on the floor?
I think Irene might have been disconnected by mistake.
Oh, I see.
Disconnection. And maybe came back.
Okay. Akshara, if you're ready before Irene comes, please take the floor.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that question is only visible to panelists because I don't think I can see it. So if one of you can read that out for me, that would be amazing.
Sure. It's asking why there's a condition for a co-PI to be a JPAL affiliate.
Right. Yeah. So as with most JPAL initiatives, the case is that only affiliates or invited researchers to the initiative can apply. And so Digify and Joy are unique in that they have opportunities built in for other scholars to also apply. But this is sort of how it usually works in initiatives at JPAL, and that's the same model that GIA has adopted. But one thing that we can do that we've discovered we have done in the past is match affiliates and invited researchers who are already eligible to apply with other scholars. So yeah, I guess that's my answer. That's usually how it works, and we're trying to also include other scholars by trying to match them at GIA.
Amy, did we miss any other questions from Facebook? There's a Facebook Live apparently question. I'm not on Facebook, so I don't understand how this works. So I have to ask Amy for help.
I don't think there are any other Facebook Live questions, so we are all caught up on that. And in what seems like great time, so Tavneet and Joy, back to you.
Thank you very much. I think this has been excellent keeping of time because we just have a few minutes before we finish. And I'll take this time to just say a big thank you. First, I want to thank the University of Nairobi for the support they have given us in organizing this. I remember we had a bit of to and fro with the corporate office, and thank you for your support. This is a university event, it's well recognized. Thank you so much, University of Nairobi, for allowing us. Next, I'd like to thank our chairman, Professor Anthony Wambugu, the chairman for the Department of Economics, has been extremely supportive. He has attended all meetings to discuss this. Thank you very much, Professor Wambugu, for your support and for your commitment to ensuring that information about grants go out to everybody, not only at the University of Nairobi, but only by extending the information to other scholars all over Africa. Thank you very much, Professor Wambugu, for your guidance and insights on how to go about this webinar. Thank you so much for Professor Tafnit Suri. In fact, we were excited when you learned that you'll be joining us. We knew that you'll be able to bring in your insights, bring in extra information, give us more than we're asking for. And you've done exactly that. You've gone over and above what we were expecting. I mean, over and above the remarks, you've answered our questions, you've opened our mind on other opportunities. We are extremely grateful to you, Tafnit Suri. JPAL Africa, we are immensely grateful to you. Thank you so much for coming out and letting us know that the opportunities to fund African scholars, that you've got financing, you've got funding for research for African scholars. Thank you very much, and for also enlightening us on what exactly randomized evaluations are all about, and all the minute, and for all the details you've given us about this funding opportunity. We thank you very much, Amy and Nidhi, for your commitment, for attending every meeting, for the ideas, and of course for making this happen through your insightful presentations. We are very thankful to you. We had our admin staff in the planning phase of this meeting, Edward and David Wanje from University of Nairobi. Thank you so much, Edward and David, even for the pressure we give you to produce a list of invitation without a short time, and you went ahead and did it. We are really grateful for your support and for your commitment. Thank you very much for for all the hard work you've done in terms of preparing the invitations and also supporting us and giving us your ideas and how this can work. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, the participants. We at one point were at least 60, slightly above 60, which is very good given that this is a highly technical webinar and not just any economists who take it on, but also people interested in randomized evaluations. So this has been a good participation and we are thankful to you. In fact, without you, there would have been no event. Thank you so much for making this happen for us. We are so thankful to you. Thank you everybody for attending and thank you so much for your support. And it's now my pleasure to ask you, please enjoy your evening or your morning or the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Have a good evening. Feel free to get in touch with us. The emails are there and we'll be able to exchange much more information. Thank you very much.